Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast, where we aim to inspire and motivate people to never give up on themselves or their dreams. We will chat with highly successful people from all walks of life and discuss what motivates and drives them to successfully attack life head on and never give up. Welcome to episode number 29 of the No Quit Living podcast. I am your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is vision. Our quote of the day comes to us from George Washington Carver: "Where there is no vision, there is no hope." Today's episode is sponsored by thebilliondollarbody.com. Men, are you looking to up-level your business? Are you looking to meet and connect with highly influential people? My good friend Nicholas Bayerly is hosting the #1 men's event this July 14th, 15th, and 16th in San Diego, California. Billion Dollar Body Live. Hear from expert entrepreneurs and surround yourself with like-minded men. Go to billiondollarbodylive.com to get your ticket. Once again, that's billiondollarbodylive.com. I'm very excited to bring you today's episode. As a successful podcaster and entrepreneur, he is passionate about what he does, as well as adding value to others. His company has already helped over 250 people get featured on podcasts, and they are just getting started. It is my complete honor and privilege to introduce Jeremy Ryan Slate. Jeremy, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me today, Chris. I'm really excited to share some value with your audience, and I hope I can really help them with what they're looking for to move forward in life and their business.
I appreciate you being here. So, our #1 objective is to both motivate and inspire our listeners to never give up. Many people in life find themselves on the 2-yard line, and they have the option of either quitting and giving up or plowing through the goal line to hopefully score that touchdown. I wanted to ask if you could share either a personal story about perseverance or perhaps a challenging time that tested you, but you kept on going and never quit.
You know, I think I want to go back to kind of one of the biggest events in my life, which is a real big turning point for me. So let's go back to a previous event, and then I'll get into that one. I'm not going to take up too much of your time here, but it'll make sense once you get it. So at 19, I was playing football. I was playing cornerback, and I was covering the receiver 5 yards on my drop back, and then I went to turn, and I stepped in a drain, and I tore every major ligament in my left knee. And when you ever had something like that happen, it's painful as heck. And I just hit the ground, and then within 30 seconds, I couldn't feel it anymore. So I was trying to stand up. I'm like, gosh, what's happening? So saw the doctor, found out, kind of what was happening with it. And I ended up getting surgery, and I was going to have arthroscopic, which, as long as you don't get an infection like Tom Brady, is usually pretty good. But I ended up having a problem with the anesthesia. And I spent 3 days on oxygen and life support and different things, even got last rites, and they just couldn't understand what was happening to me. And it's weird because when something like this happens to you, you have like an almost out-of-body experience. And it was kind of like observing the room and seeing all these things in here because I wasn't in good shape, and they didn't really know if I was going to make it. So 3 days in, I came out of this thing, and a lot of people would hear a situation like that, and they'd be like, oh, and I changed my life, and I did all this great stuff. And I kind of just kept on the same path of doing exactly what my parents wanted me to, which was get the good job, and maybe eventually you can retire and blah, 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 blah. And that's just not the way it is. So fast forward to when I was 24, and I had been teaching high school for about 2 years. And this is in 2013. And I was teaching at a small private school, not making a heck of a lot of money, working a ton of hours because private school, they don't have a lot to pay you. I had just gotten engaged that January to my now wife. And in March of that year, my mom had a massive stroke, and she lost all usage of the right side of her body, lost her language skills. And it was really tough because for a while, number one, they didn't know if she was going to make it. And it really made me look at mortality because it wasn't me. And it kind of brought me back to this situation that I had earlier in my life. And I was like, darn, I really could have lost it. And it was looking at somebody else that really made me understand that. And that was, for me, a really, really big turning point because it really made me look at, well, whose purpose am I living? Am I living my own? Am I living my parents'? And I wasn't living my own. So that kind of took me through at that point, a 3-year process to figure out what I really wanted to do. Started with, I quit my job on a whim, which not always something I recommend people. I always recommend you have something as a backup. And I then went into network marketing for a while, did direct sales, did life insurance, which that's a fun conversation to have with somebody. So you're going to die. You should probably buy this. And from there, I found my way into content marketing and podcasting. And that was where I really found my purpose, which was helping people and educating people. And that led me to my current business of Get Featured, where we help people get on podcasts. So it's interesting how some of these really horrible moments in our life, if we figure out, really find our purpose in them or find our direction to find our purpose, it can really change things if you use it in the right way.
No, that's quite a story, and I appreciate you sharing that, and I appreciate your candor, both personally as well as what your mom went through. And it brings me to a perspective on your podcast. And one of the things on your website I just wanted to touch for a minute is your podcast, Create Your Own Life, which I must recommend to our listeners, is a great show. But one of the things you say is, in this podcast, I want to give you actionable items through the things you can do, not just more fluff. There's too much out there. That is something that is really, really important to me, because that's something that we pride ourselves with No Quit Living as far as our company, as well as our podcast, is we want to give our listeners and our clients something to think about in regards to an actionable item or actionable items where they can actually make positive impact in their lives or other lives and do something. So if you wouldn't mind touching on it for a minute, because I think it is really important.
Sure. No, it's you and I were talking about this earlier. Like, it's a big annoyance to me that there's, number one, this is especially in the coaching and internet marketing space, there's a lot of people out there that want to sell a $20,000 package, a $15,000 package. But number one, they've never done the thing they're trying to help you accomplish. So I feel like it's very tough. And they also speak in like inexactities, you know what I mean? Like, find your purpose, find your motivation, find your why, and blah, 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 blah. Those things are important and they're part of the plan. But if you don't know what it takes to get to that purpose, if you don't know what it takes to develop a lot of these things, it's really going to be pretty difficult to actually get where you're going. So for me, what I try to do is I look at high performers, have them tell their story, and basically ask them things like, what was your skill set? Okay, great. You had a mentor. How did you find that person? What was that relationship like? Because I want people to listen to my show and be able to get the product of creating their own life. It may be in some smaller way or some big way, but I want them to actually be able to walk away and have tools for what they're doing, because there is a ton of motivation out there. There's a ton of business books out there, and they're all telling you a different way that you can think about it and imagine it, and all of a sudden there it is. But they don't tell you about the underlying action that has to exist in order for it to happen. And for me, that was really when I kind of made my first big leap into business. That comes from kind of being a personal development junkie and kind of realizing, great, personal development is awesome, but what am I supposed to do? And because it's funny, if you have to think of it this way, right? If anything you want in your life comes down to a be, do, have. Who do I have to be? What do I have to do? And what do I want to have? And if there's no doingness there, then good luck, man. Like, you're not going to get where you're going. But there's so many people that are selling this pipe dream in the sky. And, I want to work with somebody or listen to somebody that's going to actually tell me what to do. And really, when I started the podcast, that's who I was talking to. I was talking to myself at that point in time in my life, where I really needed somebody to tell me what to do. It's great. I want to be inspired. I want to know motivation, but action's better. Action is better, because that's what produces money, produces results, and produces the life you want.
No, I could not agree more in regards to that. You touched on something pretty interesting, is personal development junkie. We have something we talk about here, is the self-improvement movement. And we always ask our listeners as well as our clients to join us on the self-improvement movement. You touched on one thing I wanted to just go a little deeper in, is you mentioned mentors. I've found that so many of the guests that have been on our show, as well as other successful people in all walks of life, they've had multiple, if not singular, mentor or mentors in their lives that have had a significant impact. Have you had a mentor or multiple mentors in your life?
I would have to say the first real one I had was a woman named Karen Green at a company named Clear Images Design, and that's where I really kind of cut my teeth in the whole content marketing world. So she's been somebody that I've always went to for advice. But I'd have to say our biggest one now is Cameron Harold, who's been a big person that I've been able to get a lot of great advice from, because he helped 1-800-GOT-JUNK to go from, I think it's 6 million to 106 in like less than 5 years. So he knows a thing or two about building a big successful company. So for me, I always look at people that have stats. If I want to work with somebody, it's because I want to do what they've done. I don't want to just be like, hey, they're really motivating and they're awesome and blah, 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 blah. I want to work with somebody that's created what I want to create. Karen created $1 million business in the early 2000s, so she was really helpful for me. And then Cameron's created a 100+ million company several times, and I want to work with somebody that's going to teach me how to do that.
One thing we talk about is not trying to recreate the wheel. So you touched on something that I think is very interesting, is it's important to have mentors in your life. And maybe mentor might not be the word that some people use, but why not look at somebody that's done what you're looking to accomplish? And you mentioned that somebody that has stats. So for example, if you've done something that I want to do, why would I not ask for your help or your guidance? And what I've found is that a lot of people sometimes don't want to ask for help or guidance or suggestions. And I think when it comes to mentors, it's important to ask for help, and not in a selfish way of, hey, Jeremy, would you give me $100 out of your wallet? But in a professional way, saying, hey, Jeremy, I was curious if you'd give me 30 minutes or an hour of your time. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions in regards to fill in the blank. And I think one thing our listeners hopefully will take from today's show is the importance of finding a mentor or mentors and asking for help and guidance, and again, not trying to recreate the wheel.
I think that's important, but I think people have to, in terms of creating that relationship, they have to understand it's not all about them. Because a lot of times, it's funny, I give my business partner a hard time. His podcast is called Can I Pick Your Brain? And I feel like every person I hear speak says, never ask somebody that wants to be your mentor, can I pick your brain? And because it sounds like you're getting a lot more time out of them than they really want to give. So you have to really realize it's not about you. And I think that's the most difficult thing for people to realize. But that also creates the other weird paradigm there is out here right now. And that's people that want to do all this work for free and give. And then they've created this false idea that you have to give all this stuff away and then eventually you can make money. That's not true. But you do have to figure out what's in it for the mentor. How can you give them value? And the thing I look at it with is you have to come from a genuine place of really admiring and wanting to help that person, rather than this idea of, well, I got to give all this stuff and eventually I can get something. So you have to find out how this connection can also be valuable to the mentor, but from a place where you really admire what they do and want to help them, not because you're doing it just to get something. But you have to understand that everything in life, it's a value exchange. You have to give value if you want to get some. But I've just kind of seen this weird thing where people feel like they have to give a lot away in order to get something.
Can I pick your brain, Jeremy?
Yeah. You'd have to have a British accent, though. It's the only way it would work, because I guess Daniel gets away with it. He has a British accent.
That was too easy not to touch on that. One of the things many of our listeners are into is personal development and looking to improve different areas of their life. I was curious if you have a favorite book that had a significant impact on your life, or perhaps there's something that you've read recently that you'd like to recommend to our listeners.
I'd have to say one of the first big business books I read was The 10X Rule by Grant Cardone. And it kind of underlies a lot of things I've done. When I launched my podcast, I needed to get 50 to 100 reviews to get it to rank in iTunes. So what did I do? I sent out 2,700 messages on LinkedIn. It's kind of underlied a lot of things I've done, and I've applied it to everything, because taking a lot of action to actually get a result is super, super, super important. And it was also something that, helped me get through some of those early failures when I was doing sales. You know what I mean? Like, people, once you get into sales, you realize how much more like baseball it is. You're going to go out there 10 times, and if you sell 1 to 3 things, you're really, really good. So I think understanding how big a target needed to be to actually get a result that I wanted to get was like the thing that was really, really important from that book. So I've kind of applied that to every single thing I've done in my life, and I think that's why a lot of it's worked out for me. It's just because I put first and foremost the idea of you have to do a lot of something to get the result you want, and I think that's why it's really been super effective for me.
It's so funny you mentioned that book. I had the fortune of recording on Entrepreneur on Fire, and my episode will be out some point in mid-July, and JLD asked me that exact same question, is if I had a favorite book, and my answer was The 10X Rule by Grant Cardone. And I could not agree more with what you said. Is most people underestimate the amount of work is required. And then what I find and what Grant talks about is then what they do as a result is they lower their expectations. And I think that is so wrong. It's what you need to do is if you don't obtain the goal that you're looking for, you need to put more effort in. And Grant talks about 10 times the effort. So 10 times the calls, 10 times the voicemails, 10 times the emails. And you talked about sending 2,700 LinkedIn messages. I don't know a lot of people that have sent 2,700 emails in their entire life. So that just states about your perseverance and how much you were willing to make sure that you were successful. So kudos to you.
Well, and that was before I learned you could do automation on LinkedIn, so I did them all by hand.
Well, you'll get extra credit for doing it by hand, but I wish you had known the automation component because that would have saved you probably 10 to 15 hours worth of your time.
Oh, yeah.
So one of the things we do with our podcast is we utilize a daily quote, and I was curious if you have a favorite quote.
Gosh. It's not really a quote, but as much as a concept, and that's kind of the idea of not letting others. Actually, you know what? Let's go with a quote because one of my favorite people is a guy named Greg Reed, and when I got to interview Greg, I sat down with him and I said, Greg, why are you so successful? And he goes, it's because I don't seek advice, I seek counsel. Because if you're seeking advice, it's like you're asking somebody on your level's opinion. When if you want to really get past your point, you want to ask somebody that's above your level. So you're seeking counsel when you ask somebody that has the experience rather than, just asking advice. Because I'll tell you what, you're probably your friends or people you grew up with, they're going to have some really bad advice because they don't know how to grow big. Somebody that's already there, that's the person you want to talk to. So seek counsel, not advice.
That's a great quote, and I had not heard that one before, so we'll put that one in the show notes as well. If you could go back and give the 20-year-old version of yourself one piece of advice, what would that be?
I've answered this one before, and a lot of people haven't liked my answer. And for me, it would probably be not to go to college because I just have a lot of debt that I've been paying off over the years for a degree that I'm not using. Because I think especially with the online world, it's so much easier to make something of yourself because the connections are so much easier. The work is so much more accessible. So, because at that point in time, what was I doing? I was kind of going to college because that's what you do. So I was a liberal arts major and I studied religion and history and stuff like that. And I got out with a degree that I really couldn't use. I had a master's in ancient history. And unless you want to manage a library, that's, not really a degree you can do much with. So for that point in time in my life, I really think it would have been better to, work for a couple of years or, get an internship or something where I could get some job experience. And honestly, I just think that's something they really should be putting into the education system. It is kind of more, more programs where kids can work before they go to school. And I think because to get some work experience is really going to help you decide what you want to do for your life because, you shouldn't be an undecided major going into college unless, of course, you're playing college football. It kind of works out there if you have those skills, but you shouldn't be an undecided major in college because you should kind of have the idea of what products you want to produce when you get out of school, or at least a vague idea. And you should be following some sort of education path that's going to help you. So for me, that's probably the advice I would say. Get a job or get an internship or get something for a couple of years and consider going to school or don't go at all. But at that point in time, I would have said don't go to college because I had no idea.
No, it's interesting that you touch on that point. We had a woman, Jenny Lynn, on our show a couple episodes ago, and she talked about the educational system in our country. And I'm not going to say that it's broken and it needs to be completely revamped or flipped upside down, but I will agree with you as I think not only college, but in high school and in middle school, is I think as a country, we should teach some of those other skills in life that will come to play later on. And maybe that's entrepreneurship. Maybe it's dealing with some financial things such as balancing a checkbook or debt or credit and those things. And I think you touched on something that many of our guests have actually hinted at, and it's not taking away from college and what it actually means and the value it gives you, but more along the lines of having a little bit of a different spin on it where you get kids excited or interested in different things. And I think to your point is you don't need to make a decision at 17 or 18 exactly what you're going to do for the rest of your life, the next 30, 40 years. But I think in middle school and high school, if there are different courses or perhaps electives offered, it might give kids an opportunity to explore different things. And then maybe at 17, 18, 19, they'll be able to make a better educated guess knowing that they've tried this or they've tried that. So I'm glad you touch on that because I think it is important and something that has been mentioned quite a few times on our podcast.
Well, it's a really big deal because I think we're asking kids to make way too big of a choice that they're not ready to make at 17, 18, 19 years old. And, for me, what was I doing? I was taking courses I was interested in. Well, that's great, but when you're basically getting out with a mortgage without a house, it's kind of really hampering you in life if you have no idea what you're going to do. I read a survey recently. I can't remember the source off the top of my head, but I can get that for you later. That they said, millennials are going to have an average of 20 different jobs by the time they retire, based on the way things are going. And I just think that we need to have more utility of a lot of the different skills that we aren't learning in school. I just really think there's no substitute for actually doing something in terms of learning, rather than just gathering all this information to do what with.
No, I agree, and I think that's the on-the-job training and internships are awesome. It's something that we look to do and use at our firm, and I think to your point is the best real-life experience is better than reading something sometimes. And I think, again, back to my point earlier, is maybe if we help tweak the system a little bit in middle school and high school, we'll get an opportunity to have these children or kids at 17, 18, 19 make a better educated guess because they've had 2, 3, or 4 years of real-life experience.
Well, I know for me, that's like one of the big things I've done on my podcast is I have a lot of my reach out to guests. This is for the show, not for other things I do. But I had them reach out to different guests. I've had them work with some of the promotion. I've had them do the editing. But we always do this from the point of view of, okay, what do you want to learn this year? And how can I help you learn that? And when you position it that way, they love working with you because they learn skills that they're not going to learn anywhere else. Especially since I have some really different ways of doing things. So I think it's just really valuable to have an internship or something like that.
No, definitely. So question for you is, in today's day and age, it's so challenging and there's so many obstacles that come and we encounter in different times. What motivates you every single day to keep going?
This is going to be a weird one, but for me, it's actually helping people with drug problems. I came from a very small town, less than a mile, but I've watched a lot of people I grew up with pass away. So for me, it's actually creating enough income so I can handle things like that full time. My wife and I have gone and spoken into a lot of schools. We've gone and helped a lot of kids, but really, I want to be somebody that really makes a mark on that. And you need to, number one, have notoriety, and number two, have money to be able to do a lot of that stuff. So for me, that's really what it is. It's just, it's crazy. The number of people I grew up with that are gone. In northern New Jersey, we had a big heroin problem, and still do, because a lot of it comes from New York City and Patterson, a lot of these different places, and comes right up to, small town northern New Jersey. And we've lost a lot of people I grew up with. So for me, it's really taking responsibility for that and not really looking at it and just saying, well, not my problem. And it's creating notoriety and creating the money to be able to help with that.
I think that's great that you look at this and you don't take the spin of, well, it's not my problem. And I think the fact that you and your wife are doing something about it speaks a lot about not only you as well as your wife. But I think a lot of times people are faced with the option of either doing something about it or kind of just mentioning it or in a flyby, we wish we could do something. So I commend you guys for doing something about it. I wanted to ask, do you have a specific daily or morning ritual that you think has helped lead to your success both personally as well as professionally?
Yeah, it's funny because I'm actually a little bit weird with this. I'm not a super early riser, so I'm up at 6 or 6:30 every morning, and from there I go and have my carbless breakfast of just bacon and beans and eggs, and head to the gym. And I do I got this workout of the 4-hour body that I've kind of mixed with a powerlifting workout. So I go and work out for about 30 minutes, come back, take a take a 10-minute cold shower, which is fun and also invigorating at the same time. And then I come back and write down all the things that need to get done that day. Because I find if you don't write down everything that needs to get done in that given day, it can get a little bit crazy. And next thing you know, you're just handling the problems of the day and not creating a future. So it really, for me, those are the kind of basic things I do. And, also getting my bulletproof coffee there with the coconut oil and everything in it. It's really making my body and my mindset and everything in the right way so that I can produce through that day. And when I don't do those things at that time, I notice either I have a low energy level or I feel like I haven't, accomplished anything. It's amazing what giving yourself an accomplishment first thing in the morning will feel like for the rest of your day. You feel like, man, I can kick this day's butt. And that's really what you need to start your day out with. You shouldn't start your day out lagging. So for me, that's really what it is. I know it's not as high level as what a lot of other people do, but for me it works, and that's what's really enabled me to start the day out and feeling like I accomplished something so that I can power through the day.
Did you say 10-minute cold shower?
Oh yeah.
Okay, I thought perhaps my headphones were maybe not connected the right way, but I have heard many people taking cold showers and cryotherapy and all those things, but you are the first and maybe the only that I can say that I've heard of a 10-minute cold shower. So that in itself is pretty impressive. I think for me, I'd max out at about 10 seconds, maybe 15 seconds. So you got me beaten in there.
Well, there's a way to get away with that. So you have two types of fat in your body, right? You have the white fat, which is the stuff we don't like and makes us look really bad, and we have brown fat, which is kind of the fat that eats other fat. It's why muscle milk's a great product, is because it's got the brown fat in it. But the two places it's stored are on your chest and your upper back. So, clean yourself up with some warm water, soap yourself up, whatever. Then you turn it to cold, and you turn around and let it hit your upper back. And, your skin's pretty thick there, so it gets numb pretty quickly. But you're activating that brown fat, and it's not as painful as you think because you're working on your upper back rather than, the rest of your body.
Well, I take advice and suggestions from a lot of people, and as a self-improvement movement believer, I'm going to have to say that I will take your word for this, and I don't know if I'm going to go down the 10-minute cold shower route, but if I ever do, you will be the first person that I email or text, so I appreciate that, but you might have to be the only 10-minute cold shower person on this podcast today. So here's a question a little bit outside of the norm. If you could have dinner with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Abraham Lincoln. And the reason being, that guy failed a lot and then somehow got elected president. It's crazy if you just read the number of things that he's been through, and then all of a sudden the guy's elected president and literally changes the country and sets people free. That's incredible. And I want to talk to somebody that has that level of staying power and that level of ability to actually do something. And if I got to pick another, I'd have to say Winston Churchill because, number one, he's a incredibly impactful figure, and number two, and little known fact that I read in a Harry Truman biography, but apparently he was an amazing poker player. So I'd like to get a run for my money from Winston Churchill.
It's funny. Abraham Lincoln, out of all of our episodes, has been the number one selected individual for dinner. The second is Jesus. So I think it's funny. And you touched on something that I just want to touch on for a second is during one of my earlier podcasts, we talked about failure. And the most successful people in all walks of life have failed more than the non-successful people. And I think Abraham Lincoln is a pure, amazing example of somebody that took failure and turned it into his next success. And I have a framed picture of Abraham Lincoln in my office, and I'm a big fan of his in different ways. But I think what he stood for was getting knocked down but getting back up, and then getting knocked down again and getting back up. And some people say he's one of the greatest presidents. It's not my place to say he is or wasn't, but I think one of his best characteristics ever was the fact that he kept on going when I feel most people probably would have given up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's incredible when you read his election record, the number of things he lost, and then somehow he wins the presidency. So it's just amazing for somebody to stick with something that long. When a lot of us have one little failure and we're like, oh man, I can't do it. I guess I'll go do something else. And it's just it's it's this idea of you got to have a bigger vision for what you want to do for your life and keep working at it, because most people are just like, they try once and they wonder why. You know what I mean? It's consistency. It took me 9 months to get to interview Grant Cardone, but you got to work at it, man.
So it's so great that you say that, because people look at the end result of somebody being successful, whether that's business, personal, what have you, and they don't see what happened before that. And I think sometimes, as you mentioned, people will fail once and just give up. So I'm really, really excited that you said that, because I love what Abraham Lincoln stands for. And I just think that more people need to realize that it's okay to fail. People fail all the time, but what you can't do is you can't allow that failure to fully defeat you. What you need to do is you need to learn, improve, and grow from those failures, so your next attempt, whether it's business, personal, relationship, is a better version of you. And I really appreciate you sharing that. And I did not know about Winston Churchill being a pretty good card player, so I think that would be an interesting dinner to watch, you and him playing cards.
Well, he had an incredible taste in scotch, incredible taste in cigars, two things that I definitely enjoy, and also an amazing poker player. So to me, that sounds like a very interesting weekend.
No, that would definitely be an interesting weekend, and he's probably got a really good poker face as well. So I wanted to ask you, in addition to your unbelievably successful podcast, I wanted to ask if there's anything else exciting that you're working on that you'd like to share with our listeners.
Well, the biggest thing that's getting like 90% of my time right now is my company Get Featured. And I've been a podcaster for almost 2 years now, and one of the biggest things we do is we get pitched by a lot of people that want to be on our show. And like, I guess the worst one I ever got is somebody just sent me a press release, and I'm like, it didn't say deer, it didn't say anything. I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this? So we're kind of like, well, we can really help people figure out how to get on podcasts, but then also there's a second element of coaching them to be great podcast guests, and that really enables us to give value back to the podcasting space. So that's really been what's taking most of our time. We've gotten clients on over 250 podcasts at this point. We've had a bunch of different clients we've been working with. So it's been really cool, and it's really allowed me to take this valuable thing of a podcast, which, most of us aren't ever going to make money off of, and actually have my dream career.
That's a great concept, and I think the fact that you've helped over 250 people already speaks highly of not only what you guys do, but the quality in which you do it. So before we let you go, I wanted to ask if you had any parting words you'd like to give to our listeners.
Well, the big thing would be, I just wrote something about this on Facebook today, and it's consistency. It's this idea of continuing to work at something. I listened to a podcast a couple years ago with Ryan Daniel Moran from Freedom Fastlane, and he talked about this idea of, you start a podcast and you feel like you're talking to the air, and you're like, is anybody listening? Is anybody listening? Is anybody listening? All of a sudden, boom, there's an audience there, and there's people talking to you, and there's people working with you. But the biggest thing is you have to not quit in that period of time. You have to be consistent, and you have to keep working. We're on pace to have our best month of stats ever. Well, we already beat that. We're on pace to double our best month of stats ever. But it took, almost 2 years at this point to get to that point of continually working, getting lots of no's. So you have to have a thick skin and be willing to be consistent and keep working with what you're doing.
That's great advice, and I could not agree more. The no-quit component, which is obviously why our show is titled that. So last question, and I promise it's the easiest one we've asked today, is what's the best way for our listeners to follow or connect with you?
Best way to find me is over at jeremyryanslate.com. They can find out anything about Get Featured, any of my social links, and then any of my press or anything. They're all over there.
Well, listen, I cannot thank you enough for being a guest on our show. I truly appreciate your advice as well as you sharing your story, and I look forward to hopefully speaking with you soon.
Thank you so much, Chris. This has been awesome.
Thank you, sir. To sum up today's episode and our theme of the day, vision, Ryan delivered. He shared his story about tearing all the ligaments in his knee while playing football, quitting his job as a teacher, and dealing with his mother's stroke. When the going got tough, Jeremy stepped up big time. He had and acted upon that bigger vision of his life. He found his purpose, which is helping others. As a self-proclaimed personal development junkie, it is clear to see that Jeremy is passionate about improving himself, and he isn't afraid of getting his hands dirty. When he initially launched his podcast, he spoke about sending out over 2,700 LinkedIn messages. In his parting words, Jeremy shared the importance of consistency and why it is so key that you continue to work on something and not to quit during those tough times. When the going gets tough, what do? Do you keep on going or do you give up? When you have the choice of bending versus breaking, what choice do you make? I hope today's episode inspired you to consistently continue to work and to take action. Take action and go for your greatness. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.